Good morning, everybody. My name is Marco Pignataro. I'm the managing director of the Berkeley Global Jazz Institute, and it's a pleasure to introduce the last of the 3 days of these amazing student culminating experience presentations. I would like to acknowledge our artistic director, Danilo Perez. Please welcome Danilo. Our BJJ faculty, Terrylyn Carrington, who is with us today as well. And the Dean, Camille Colatosti, Mal Marvuglio, who are being supporting our program from the beginning. Please acknowledge them as well. Thank you. And all the people working here very hard, all the sound person and all the crew, and especially our staff, in particular Mary, that is still working over there. Everybody clap for Mary. As part of this presentation, the students have been mentored by the old faculty, and they're all been assigned an advisor for this all years. I would like to recognize the advisor, Professor Alan Chase, Professor Carl Eiley, and Professor Bruno Raberg, who is here today. For today, we're going to start with a bass player that came to us after graduating from the New England Conservatory, and he has brought a beautiful energy and wonderful music. Please all welcome Isaac Levien. Isaac advisor was Bruno Raberg, and we have also the pleasure to welcome Susan Hagen in the panel today. Thank you, Susan, for being with us. Go get him.
Hello. For my culminating experience, I composed and arranged a collection of music that in its entirety is called the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene is something I discovered through a lot of the reading I've been doing over the past few years, or couple of years. Specifically, this author, Yuval Noah Harari, who's an Israeli historian. He specifically focused his recent studies on the history of happiness, which is a kind of unique and interesting way to approach human history. And the Anthropocene is the new name for our current geological and ecological time period. It's called that because it's anthro, like human, anthropology. It's called the Anthropocene because it's the time during which we as human beings have had the largest impact of anything on our natural environment and geology and ecology. And like more than anything else, we've moved more dirt than natural forces have and that sort of thing. This was particularly interesting to me because environmental issues are something I feel incredibly passionate about. And I've been trying to find a way to incorporate that into my artistic work. And I know it's also a big piece of the Berkeley Global Jazz Institute and what we believe in here. And so I started this kind of personal search, also in the hopes of getting back in touch with nature. And I realized that from where I was in school, living in a city, I didn't really have the resources to go out into the world and explore nature entirely on my own. So I started to look towards other means, and that brought me to poetry. And I started to read a bunch of poetry and poets that have a unique perspective on our environment and the natural world. And that led me, that kind of I combined with some of my past studies of counterpoint and my musical influences from Schoenberg to Charles Mingus to create this collection of original compositions called the Anthropocene. So for the final project I used 4 poets and 4 poems. The first poem is by G.E. Patterson. He stood out to me. One, he's the youngest of the poets I used. He's one of the only ones that's still alive. He was a student, went to Princeton and Stanford, and grew up on the Mississippi, kind of lived his whole life being with nature as a big part of it. And his poem, The Natural World, kind of brought to my attention this new idea that our environment isn't necessarily nature. Our environment is actually whatever surrounds us, which was something important for me to realize as I felt kind of disconnected from nature, from my environment, living so much time in a city. And so for that, I wrote The Jungle, using a lot of those musical influences I said earlier.
You've got trees, dappled with sunlight and shade. You've got birds, birds waking you up in the morning. My birds, my birds, my birds, my trees. You've got birds in the morning. You've got bearing trees. My birds loud as jackhammers. My trees stainless steel claws. My trees.
Thank you. So, I'm gonna go back real quick. The first 3 of the 4 tracks on my album, or on my project, I used the poetry as lyrics rather than spoken word. On the last one, I used them as spoken word. Because of this, I sometimes took some artistic liberties with the poem, also to just make me feel comfortable presenting them as my own work. I used, which you heard a little bit of, I used these chorales as a sort of a bookends to my whole project. That was the very first piece on the project. It starts off with this chorale. That theme, that compositional theme reoccurs throughout the project, and the last piece, which you'll hear, is entirely based on that. And additionally, all of those chorales are using the melodies from the pieces, and every one of the melodies, I tried as best I could to kind of use a compositional and improvisational technique we learned here at the Berklee Global Jazz Institute from Danilo Perez, where we use words as rhythmic and melodic patterns, so kind of transcribing speech. So I would sit down at the piano with these poems, just like this, and try as best I could to just read it and improvise melodies. And as soon as I found something that I felt truly connected to the poem, I would move on and use that for the rest of the composition. The next poet I used is Gary Snyder. His poem Without I used for my track Silence. He's kind of the tail end of the beat poet generation. And one of the things that really brought him to my attention is how he spent a huge amount of his life living kind of off the grid, living in nature, living on farms, and really just living off of the earth in as natural of a way as he possibly could. I really like that. Has had a huge influence on all his writing and his poetry. And when I started reading his poetry, I felt very connected to that. It's all very introspective, and so I used his poem Without. It's kind of the only ballad on the album, although I don't know if it comes across as such, but it's called Silence.
The silence, the silence, the silence of nature within. The power within, the power without.
Thank you. For the third piece in the project, I used this poem by Langston Hughes called Lament for Dark Peoples. I think this was, for me, one of the hardest of the poems to approach. It's a very, very intense poem, largely about just kind of the common experience of minorities around the world throughout human history. being taken from their homes, taken from their natural environments, and thrown into a unnatural environment, and what that does to someone and their identity as a person. But I was additionally attracted to Langston Hughes and his poetry because of his involvement in jazz music and jazz history. He was one of the first poets to collaborate with jazz musicians and improvisation, kind of one of the first spoken word, pioneers of spoken word poetry. He worked with one of my favorite composers and bass players, Charles Mingus. And so for this next piece, Circus, I drew very heavily on what to me I hear is a influence from Charles Mingus.
They took me away from the trees, my trees. They took me away from the trees, my trees. Oh, hey. La-da-do-day, da-da-do, la-da-do-da-da, hey. Da-da-do-do-da-do-do-day, ah-do-day, da-day-da-day, day-do-day, da-day-da-day, day-day. Drove me from the jungle, I lost my silver
Thank you. The final piece on my project is using a poem called Untitled. It's just Untitled. I used it for a track called Dirt. I called this track Dirt because, again, with the idea of the Anthropocene as the backbone of this whole project, dirt's one of the deciding factors of what has made this era called the Anthropocene. Not only have we moved more dirt than Mother Earth herself moves, but we also have drastically changed what dirt is. We've taken a lot of the natural nutrients from the planet out of it, so much so that we have to pump back our own versions of those nutrients, and it's changing the way that we live our lives, the way that we eat food, all of these things. Additionally, Nanao Sakaki was a Japanese World War II veteran. He actually witnessed the bomb drop on Nagasaki, which has to have given him an incredibly unique perspective for the rest of his life. I think that's one of the reasons that he continued on his life to be a nomad, to live in kind of communes, much like Gary Snyder, who was his good friend. And one more note about this last piece. This drawing, which you might have noticed in the rest of the project, this character is kind of how I've been envisioning the main character of this whole project, which I'll talk about a little bit more after this, but you'll hear a kind of funny voice, and I just want to make it clear that that's his voice, or her voice, its voice.
If you have time to chatter, read books. If you have time to read, walk, into mountains, desert, and ocean. If you have time to walk, sing songs and dance.
If you have time to dance, sit quietly, you happy, lucky idiot. Thank you. Very briefly before completely out of time, just want to say the future of this project, I'm hoping to release it strictly digitally, just so as to reduce any kind of more carbon footprint I have. I am working, all of those drawings are my own original drawings, and I'm working to create a story and a kind of like comic book to go along with the whole project, which will be available to download with the download of the audio. And it'll be free with an optional donation to a kind of environmentally conscious charity via a website. I want to again thank my musicians, Juan Mi Jung on voice, Mario Fabrizio on drums, Andres Abonante on guitar, PJ Anderson on trombone, Nassim Alatrash on cello, Matt Stubbs clarinets, Daniel Bobby on electronics, Adam Weiss, Daniel Bobby, and Venceslas Ostasenko also helped out in the studio. And to the entire Berklee Global Jazz Institute community and Berklee at large. Thank you.
Congratulations, Isaac. Wonderful. let's gather some comment or question from the panel. Who would like to start? Maybe Susan, you're our new guest here.
I think that this concept of environmentalism, which is so important, and the fact that this project is going to continue to grow and morph and be alive after today, I think you could find a way to bring this to more people and help. And I loved the poems that you chose. I really liked the way you incorporated the music that you wrote. Just seemed to make sense with the poetry. And I liked the way you took some of the poetry, but you didn't directly quote all of it, because then it felt like, this is how I've been impacted by these poems. This is what's special and important to me. And I really liked that. I wrote a lot. But I thought it was really well done, extremely well thought out. And I love that it's not over after today, because I think that this is really important. So, and I'm so glad I was writing, I want to get this album. I think it's okay for you to call it an album and not just the project, because this is continuing on. And so I'm really glad that there is going to be a way. And I love, again, you're linking it in with environmentalism, the donation. It's great. But I just thought it was really well done and well thought out. So
Thank you.
a lot of excellent playing on your part. And nice bow. But the other players sounded great, and it sounded so professional and well done. Nothing about it sounded like a student project. This sounded completely like a very experienced musician and artist. So I thought that was really great.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Susan. Yeah, Isaac, it was amazing to have you as an advisee this semester. The project is just blowing me away. And basically every week, pretty much, you came in and you gave me something new about you that was like, what? You said, well, and then there's the comic book. I'm like, what? Are you writing? Yeah, I draw and write comics. Okay, in addition to, so every week. So you're truly multi-talent. I mean, it's because you write poetry. Obviously, you're a great bass player, composer, and drawing. I mean, it's just. And this project, you were able to show all that, and I was glad. I hope in kind of helping you pull all the pieces in, because you had so many ideas that were each, you could have gone with one idea and that would have been a presentation kind of thing. So it was truly inspiring being around you, working with you, and keep the project going. We need it more than ever. I could talk a lot more, but I think that's sum and set up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations. This to me is really pointing to the future, as far as multi-directional artist, like Bruno said, with all the different things that you do coming together. So that's a big feat, for you to pull it off the way that you did. I had a couple of questions. I wondered how you determined which text to edit, like how to omit certain things, like if you had a certain process with that, or if even some of I noticed some of the words that changed, and I know that's a very personal thing to a lot of poets. So it's very brave of you, even a small thing like you got trees or you've got trees, because now I was a little confused, because to me you have got trees, which you've got trees says, I wondered, did the person mean you got trees or you have trees? You know what I mean? Like, so I just wondered if you, like, how you processed that part.
Yeah, that was one of the bigger challenges for me, especially again, for the Langston Hughes poem, I think I might compose more for that piece because I left out the whole first stanza kind of I guess out of I was a little scared to approach that. I didn't know how to. And I met early on in the process, I met briefly with Jason Moran, set aside some time to talk to me about this, and I brought that poem up, and I said, I don't know if I can approach it, and he said, well, then you have to approach it. And so I did my best, but I think I'll keep working on. I don't think that one's finished. As for the other one, the smaller details, some of it was very conscious. I think for the G.E. Patterson poem, it was very stream of conscious. It was, I heard the words kind of rearrange themselves to form a melody in my head, and I couldn't really backtrack on that. Whereas the original poem, as much as I like it, wasn't leading me to a song and a melody in the same way. And some of the other words, some might have just been small human error, a piece of the project as well.
The other question I had is, have you considered grants, grant writing, and this type of project? Because I've sat on a bunch of grant panels, and this type of project seems tailor-made, for certain kinds of grants. So maybe it's something for you to consider.
Yeah, that's definitely part of the next step, along with the multimedia aspect of it.
Great. Well, congratulations. You're a Renaissance
Thank you.
man.
Thank you.
Isaac, congratulations. Wow. Brought up a lot of things here. In February 14 this year, the Valentine's Day, there was an incredible write-up about this in the New York Times magazine. And the title says, is this the answer is the condemnation of human Anthropocene, is the condemnation of human interference, or a call for more? That was look for that article. And as I'm listening to you, you're kind of having a call for more. To me, is the way you are embracing this topic. It's really it's a great reinforcement to those scientists who are fighting for this to become a topic right now. We're in an era where this is an issue. A lot of people don't believe it's true. But I wrote here, like, we are the first species that has become a planet scale influence and is aware of that reality. We know, but we are avoiding it to face it. So I think with the work that you are implying a subtle reinforcement, this is something that Neil Tyson deGrasse will be excited to hear. I will encourage you to make this a path, because it's a very clear path and it's a very important one, and it's relevant because you are. It's not about making music that creates like, oh, I'm inspired. It's like narcissist kind of behavior, but it's really reinforcing a topic from a very humble way, and that's what I heard. The music that you put together is a soundtrack to an idea. It's not the music; it's the idea. And there's a lot to do in that sense. So I think you just open a new line of thought, very clear, and I congratulate you for this is fantastic, very inspiring, and looking forward to as Susan said, this is just the beginning of how I love to see where it's gonna go. Thank you for this work.
Thank you.
I have a bit of a problem with you changing the poems. I agree with both Susan and Terlin in a way that I understand that you made it even more personal by doing that, but it was hard to listen to that and see the poem at the same time. So I think as you release it, maybe you should really be very clear to the listener and the reader about that. Yeah, because there was some sentences that you had put together that wasn't in the poem that that poet might never would have written. You know what I mean? It's yeah.
You know, this will be solved when you do the children version, because you can't do that. That will call you. He has to do a children version of this, like for child, and you have to deal with the poem as the poem is, because they'll call you upon that. So that's it.
The children will.
Yeah.
Do the children version of this, and you don't have to get too much involved.
Yeah, absolutely.
Isaac, I'm actually glad that you decided to put the poems. I know that in the first version of the presentation you did, and I think it adds a lot to me personally. I didn't have a problem with that, but I understand what you're doing. But I really think it was great. You know what I was thinking as I'm listening to the music again, and you know, like the content is so strong, and the association do with the poems and with the environmental issue is obviously the main inspiration, you know, but even if I take all of that away, I really, truly enjoy the music in itself. You know, even if I wouldn't know anything about the poem, which, by the way, the 4 poems you chose are incredible. I mean, really, I wasn't aware of any of them. I need to kind of dig into it. So that kind of arose that in my curiosity in me. But even with that aside, I really, truly enjoy the music. There's a sense of like almost film noir to it that I really kind of appreciate the kind of mood you create. And I wanted to ask you a little bit, you know, in terms of composition, you know, if you talk a little bit about the form or the absence of form, how you were kind of thinking about composing and putting the words in it, like from a more technical point of view, if you can describe a little bit the process.
It was again for a lot of the where I use the poetry as lyrics. It was a sort of stream of conscious, like using Danilo's method of melodic, and as well as trying to follow the arc of the poem, because all of the poems kind of gave me form. So I thought more kind of less in terms of like AABA or, you know, typical jazz forms, and more in terms of stanzas, having like the chorale out front is one stanza, a vocal intro is kind of another stanza, the whole band comes in, that's another stanza, and they're all related, they're all building on each other, but at the same time they could also kind of be taken on their own. They'd probably mean something different and more or less powerful, it's hard to say, but nonetheless could happen on their own.
Okay, wonderful, congratulations. Isaac Levien, beautiful.